Here we go.
Barbara and Lynn, we have Professor Selecki, and you guys can get going whenever you're ready.
Great.
Thank you. Yep. Should I get started? Just to introduction, so everybody knows. I'm Barbara Rudder with Lynn Strong. We're co-chairs of the Environment Committee. And the Environment Committee has been asked to examine what can be done to mitigate storms, the climate changes, such as Ida, the storm Ida that we had. So Dr. Selecki, we're so pleased that you came back again. You were here before. And Dr. Selecki is professor from our own Hunter College, from the Institute of Resiliency Cities, right? Is that right?
Sustainable cities.
Sustainable. I knew that wasn't right. Sustainable. So thank you. And maybe you'll explain what you're doing and so on. So thank you.
Great. And thank you, Barbara. And thank you, everybody, for participating in this. Thanks, Will, as well, to helping facilitate. So again, we really appreciate your time here. One of the things that we've been sort of focused on at the Institute and sort of CUNY more generally is to sort of understand how societies, how communities can better respond to climate issues, enhance resiliency. And so one of the things that we've been doing is developing what are described as decision support tools, things that are designed to sort of help dialogue or promote dialogue amongst members of a community, whether that's an agency, whether it's a community board or some other organization, and to sort of promote discussion within that group to sort of identify common interests and sort of in the turn sort of forward the progress toward enhanced resiliency. So one of the things that we've developed recently is something called the post-extreme event learning tool. And its particular focus is on these sort of moments after an extreme event, not directly after an extreme event, but in the months followed, as the community sort of comes back together and starts to sort of think about what to do next, like what happened to us, why did it happen to us, and how to be better prepared or do things better in the future. So PELT is specifically designed to sort of address, to provide that opportunity for dialogue. It's described as a decision support toolkit, right? And sort of, agency lingo. And what we'll do this evening is we'll run through a demonstration of the tool as it stands and the various sort of elements of it. We've got myself and two colleagues, doctoral students are here to help us in that process. So we have Parisa Satayesh and Charlie Overton. And we've been developing this tool. It's actually predates their engagement. This is something over the last couple of years, but really in the past 6 months have really started to bring it together. And this, what we describe is sort of it's described as a beta version. So it's not the full version. You guys are basically graciously agreed, whether you know it or not, to be sort of test samples, so to speak. And so what you'll see, I equate this, it's if you like to go to Broadway, this is still sort of off Broadway, and maybe we're still in rehearsals, right? So that's sort of how you want to think about it. We're in Stanford and we're in rehearsals, like, off Broadway and still in rehearsals. But, getting input from you all is going to be really central to us, like what's working, what's not, how to adjust it. So we're going to go through the demonstration. There's a set of slides which Parisa will introduce in a moment. And we'll go through that, and then we'll go through the operations itself. And then from that, we'll start to move through some evaluation. We will hope to have, the test part of it done. I know it's late. You've all had long days. I've had long days, et cetera. I know you have more of the meeting to go as well. So I don't want to take up. I think this will. I'm feeling positive or hopeful that we'll probably get through this part within an hour, and then we'll do a little bit of an evaluation, or depending on maybe to you, Barbara, and the group, how much time would one want to spend. I don't want to keep people too long, but this will be an abbreviated version of the larger discussion. I don't know, Barbara, does that sound okay so far?
Yes, and Lynn, do you agree? Yes, I think that would
Yeah,
be okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so Parisa, do you want folks to go right into Mentimeter at the moment, or should I introduce that and then go through some of the slides?
No, I don't think that would be necessary. So we can go through the introduction slides, and then there's a slide for getting into Mentimeter, and I will explain it at that point.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Great.
So next, please. So what we're using as the sort of the springboard for this conversation is obviously Hurricane Ida, which was truly a devastating event throughout the city and throughout the metropolitan region. Quite striking in a way because of the amount of rainfall that fell. We can go into the whole hydrometeorology of the issue, but it was quite significant at that particular time. And that becomes the extreme event. And I think someone will get the phone. I'm not going to leave here. But this becomes the extreme event that we're going to reference back to, right? So this is like the starting point. So as we're going through the next conversation, think back to those days, September 1, September 2nd, what it meant for the community, what it meant for you personally. These are the issues that we're going to be revisiting and what we can think about for the future. Okay, next, please. So I highlighted some of this already, but basically one of the things that we recognize both in the academic literature and the policy literature is that, after an extreme event, a community is like, trying to get itself back together, trying to understand what happened and what the implications are moving forward. And what we're doing here is we've designed this particular type of intervention called PELT, post-extreme event learning tool, which would take advantage of that window that we know opens up when the community is flexible, interested in sort of like asking the big why questions, and in turn sort of developing new strategies to sort of, we're never going to happen again. We're going to make this community better or more resilient. So we want to look at some of these learning opportunities that happen, post-event, and then accentuate them, strengthen them, reveal them, and then potentially through a dialogue, promote opportunities to develop locally relevant recommendations and conclusions. So that's the process that we're sort of underway with. Next, please. So PELT as a process itself is sort of a kind of a three-stage process. We haven't sort of burdened you with all the other parts, but we've been doing a little bit of background work trying to sort of, find out exactly what happened with the community board with respect to Hurricane Ida, and then we would do like a post-workshop activity and sort of recap with let's say a potential group or NGO or whomever we're meeting with. We're going to focus specifically on this workshop element, and we're going to ask 3 questions this evening, like what happened during the event and its aftermath. How can collaborative knowledge of the event's impact generate local understanding of adaptation needs, right? So to sort of, promote learning within the group, and that from that, how do identified barriers, gaps, or other needs connect with the community's current adaptation goals, or maybe larger goals about, community advancement. So these are the things that we're going to be looking into. Next. Within the workshop itself, there's going to be a sequence of steps. Fundamentally, we're going to ask you all to sort of reflect back on your lived experience from the extreme event, and then also sort of tie into that sort of more, broader observed examples of what happened in the community and the understanding of the event in the community itself. We'll develop some discussion to sort of synthesize these 2 sort of parts of the process, and then also look at from that, what were the impacts from the event and what were the causes of that particular event. and what we can sort of learn from those causes as ways of adjusting our adaptation policy. Right? And that's sort of in questions 4 and 5. And then from that, start to integrate a broader discussion about the strategies and policy adjustments that could be utilized to enhance adaptation opportunities and resilience opportunities within the community. Okay, next. And I'm battling my cat here, who's just decided to jump on my desk. So I apologize if you see a tail flying around at the moment. That's not mine, it's the cat's. All right, so what some sort of process stuff that we want to sort of think about. We're going to be using a program called Mentimeter. I'm not sure if people are familiar with it, but it's similar to these other sort of web-based programs that allow groups to sort of come together via Zoom or other forum to understand, and quickly kind of illustrate sort of positions on particular issues. We're going to be using our laptops. I assume most of you are on the laptop at this point, and that we're also going to utilize smartphones to do some of the entering that will be part of the Mentimeter process. There are some specific terms that I also want to highlight. One is this issue of impact. So we're going to use this to describe what the result of the event was. And these are typically measured in sort of losses and in damages. So we'll ask you, what were some of the key impacts that you observed? What were the key impacts for the community? So it's that kinds of things. They could be economic, they could be social, they could be environmental, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean just like, my basement or the basement of my building was flooded and, there was X amount of thousands of dollars of damage. It could be, I couldn't get out for my social engagements that were really important to me, or I had to miss some particular event. So there are many ways we can define this question of impact. We're also going to be looking at this issue of what are the causes of these impacts. And we'll start to look at particular types of causes, those that are more reflective of sort of underlying issues that, kind of provide the foundation of how our society is organized, everything from that to really specific things about when the flooding occurred, when the storm occurred, and very sort of what we describe as sort of immediate kind of causes. We'll also look at the term risk, which is based on this sort of notion of potential impact, which oftentimes is described as the probability that something is going to happen, and then times, quote unquote, in a broad way, the consequence. Right. So what's the risk of something happening, and the hazard we're also going to focus on. In this case, it's defined as an impact or harmful event. So these are the things. So again, some of these are pretty commonplace terms. Others are slightly more definition bound: impact, cause, risk, and hazard. Any questions up till this point? I want to make sure I know I'm kind of jumping through a lot of stuff. Any questions so far? If you have questions, certainly bring them up. I guess there isn't a chat in this forum, but I guess
we raise our hand. I think
no raised hands right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Hurricane Ida. So bring us back to that place. Maybe next. So one of the things about Hurricane Ida and why it was so unusual and why it was so profound, and I presented on this to your committee. I forgot when that was now, maybe in October, November of last year. It was the amount of rainfall over this short period of time. And this is, again, sort of very much reflective. I can't say it's specifically climate change, but it's reflective under the conditions that we could assume climate change would occur, these sort of massive, downpours. And that was certainly the case. We look at these graphics here. Both the left and the right illustrate the red dots illustrate on the graph on the map on the left areas of more than 7 inches of observed rainfall, and then the one on the right similar. Anything in pink is more than 6 inches, and then if you get into the deeper reds, that's more than 10 inches. So it was like basically Staten Island. If you can squint your eyes there a little bit, Staten Island, parts of Woodbridge in New Jersey, very close to Manhattan. We're exceeding 10 inches of rain over this roughly 24-hour period. Manhattan also got a tremendous amount of rain. So we were Manhattan, this slice of Manhattan really was in the bullseye of Ida. Next, please. So if we look at some of the impacts, and of course, what I'm really looking forward from you all is to sort of get a distillation of what some of those impacts are. But if you look at this, these were the 311 calls, the storm complaints that came out during that time, and you sort of illustrate a pretty thick pattern of 311 calls specific to the community board, and the different colors indicate different sorts of types of issues. The brown are the flooded sewers and streets. The blue are water leaks. The green are damaged or fallen trees, and the yellow are water and electrical outages. So it's pretty widespread throughout the area. And of course, this is an underrepresentation of what the problems are. But you can see that calls were coming in fast and furious during this time. Next, please. And what you can again sort of connect with is that while the neighborhood is heavily altered, heavily built upon, there are still issues of elevation and where you see the different sort of slightly higher, slightly lower elevations. The graph or the map on the right shows elevation. We see slightly higher elevations as we go toward off the East River toward Central Park, of those sort of yellows and browns, higher elevation, and then. If you kind of toggle your eyes left to right, you see that there's, in general, in some cases, there's, 311 calls coming up near the park, but you see a higher preponderance of them as you edge, east of Lexington Avenue, east of 3rd Avenue, toward the river, and with that, significant increases. Apologies, I'm now moving things around because my cat has decided to eat my food. The last one with the sort of intro here is the flood zones in Manhattan. Although we see one of the kind of the really insidious, if I could use that word, qualities of Hurricane Ida is that it wasn't a classic storm in the sense of we were expecting storm surge or coastal flooding from a large storm. In fact, it was just all rainfall. Right, and in fact, much of the Community Board 8 region is fairly high elevation relative to some of the flood zones that the city has designated, and you see that sort of highlighted here. Only a small little bit of the shoreline is actually in a Category 3, which is a very powerful storm, and much is at higher elevation. But Hurricane Ida revealed vulnerabilities that maybe the Community Board didn't really think about. So next, please. Okay, so with this, you've heard a little bit of the intro, a little bit of what we're trying to achieve. What we'll do now is sort of shift into sort of the application part, where we want to start to kind of collectively learn about how you all experienced Hurricane Ida, the implications that might have, and start to sort of build opportunities for learning across the group, and to highlight what these impacts might have been and how to address them. So I'm going to turn to my colleague Parisa to sort of help us walk us through some of these steps in getting us kind of introduced to the use of Mentimeter, which I found pretty easy, and I'm fairly ignorant on these sorts of things. So I'm hoping that you guys will have some comfort level with it. But Parisa, please.
Okay, so if you could please, on your mobile phones, I think it would be easier to use on a mobile phone. If not, you can also use it on a browser on the screen that you're currently using. So on your browser on the mobile phone, go to www.menti.com. That's written on the screen as well. And when you get there, you're going to see a space to enter a code, and then enter the code that is written on the screen. 7859318. You can also use the link that has been posted on the chat to the Zoom and open it on your computer.
We can't just use the whatever this is called, this hotspot, without a phone?
Yes, the QR code. Sure.
Yeah, the QR code.
Of course, yes. Or take a photo of the QR code and just hold your camera over the QR code and enter the site.
That would be the preferred way, because then you could stay on screen and then use your phone as the
Right.
data entry. So for folks, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit further, because this has also been relatively new to me. So you just open your photo option in your phone.
Open
Right.
your camera, hold it over, like look through it through the lens at the QR code, and the link is going to appear. So you just click on the link and your browser will open. I think somebody had a question because somebody pressed on the question. When you get there, if it's a thumbs up, click on the thumbs up so I can see how many of you are successfully in the Mentimeter. All right, 2,
When
3.
you monitor, then you're able to monitor if anybody's raising their hand.
Yeah, I don't see anybody raising their hand other than a thumbs up signal.
Okay.
But I went and I'm getting, it just says instructions, a question
Right.
mark and a hands up,
Yes.
hands up, hands down. Is that what we're supposed to be looking
Exactly.
at?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So that is so far what it's supposed to be. And then as we go through it, the questions are going to pop up and you're going to see spaces to answer for each question on your screens.
And
Before
if
you move on, oh, no, never mind. You had a hand up. I just thought they may have had a question. I think they figured it out.
So if you see, if you're looking at our screen here, you'll see the 5 folks have engaged. So we're, I think, waiting for a few more. Is that right, Teresa?
Yeah, I think we're hoping for 10 thumbs up. So if everybody is 6, we're increasing. So when everybody's successfully in Mentimeter, we'll start.
Oh, do we do the thumbs up on here? I was
Yes,
doing,
please.
I'm sorry.
Thank
I
you.
was doing it, through
Okay.
Zoom. Okay.
Yeah, your phone will become the place where
Okay.
you'll record your information.
Okay, great.
Okay, so is everybody successfully in?
Yes.
Seems well.
Because I see 1 thumbs up here on the screens as well. So I kind of added that. Maybe everybody's in already.
Right.
Is anyone not in who wants to get in? Oh, here we got one more. Or maybe.
Does everybody know that if you want to raise your hand through Zoom, you go to the reactions and
Right, that's correct.
then do the raise hand from there.
I think you have everyone.
Okay, why don't we
Great.
proceed ahead?
Excellent.
Okay, so you're going to see, maybe you're going to
Right.
see the question now, or you're going to see a refresh. So if you see the refresh it, and you'll see the first question pop up, which is about how you and in your household, you were affected by Hurricane Ida.
We have to put in lots of words.
You can put in as many words as you want.
Actually, this is a question for you, Parisa. Can they use the audio button? Like instead of
No.
type. Okay. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Maybe we'll go a drop faster if that's okay. I don't know if.
What?
Could we maybe like
Submit. I'm sorry, I didn't see the submit. Okay.
So what you're seeing as the screen comes, you're seeing the types of responses that people have brought forward. So I don't know if you want to speak to this, Parisa, or what? Oh, we got a little bit more. So we see sort of some variations. Obviously, there's not a big deal, minimally impacted, but then that it ranges all the way from that to being alone, scared, we stayed at home. I mean, so
Mhm.
interesting. I mean, folks aren't really recording economic losses per se or economic issues, which is good, but certainly a lot of social impacts and sort of well-being.
Yeah.
Or so in the next questions, if you could, not in this one, kind of elaborate on what possibly you meant by inconvenience, like exactly what that type of inconvenience was.
Where do we put that?
No, in the next question doesn't.
Oh.
We're gonna. There are gonna be other opportunities. So.
Okay. Have we gathered everyone?
We have 8 responses. We're waiting.
Okay.
It's good.
Good. Okay, so we can go to the next question, I think.
Excellent. So you go.
No,
Parisa.
you.
So in this case, what we're looking for is not so much, we've identified some household issues, and now we're sort of looking out to the larger, the larger community or the community board, however you want to define it, neighborhood. But it's like, how is the community affected? Again, with an eye toward those sort of, key impacts. So you could take now a moment to sort of, get into that space. Okay, I think we've gotten responses. Do you want to, should we, you go, Parisa.
Sure. So this is, there's a number of concerns. There are different concerns around like well-being concerns with fear for loved ones, access to maybe like transport, and I think I read access to meds. And there's also a number of them around like power outages here. And a number of people are also talking about road closures, like getting around became more difficult. So I think we have 3 areas of impacts.
Yeah, I mean, actually, in that, is there anything that, how do people feel that this sort of reflects, what they understood, or does it sort of reflect the variety of perspectives that you felt? I mean, is it sort of encapsulating it? Are there things missing? Is it something that's sort of unexpected?
It seems to me that there's emotional and physical, damage. So a ceiling, I knew people that couldn't use their elevator because the elevators were out. But then there's the emotional of feeling alone and so on. And I don't know if you wanted to distinguish those two. I didn't know. I wasn't sure, I answered 2 different ways.
No, I think that's very good. I mean, I think, what we're trying to do here, and again, the exercise, I mean, just to sort of give a little prelude, I guess, if we were doing a full treatment, we would start to like investigate like a lot of these and sort of go through them. But the process here is that we're going to sort of willow down a little bit and try to
Yeah.
bring up like, what was like maybe a key economic one, a key social one,
Mhm.
maybe a key environmental one. But I think it's appropriate to sort of look at the different dimensions that that are being expressed here, both in terms of the economic side, social. There's a little bit of environmental, like the downed trees and so forth, and other sorts of issues, falling trees. But I think it's certainly good to get that broad breadth in here. But are there things that you felt like that are missing, like, or is this in any way surprising? Is there any sort of like thing that, wow, I didn't really think about it in that way. I didn't, experience it that way. I didn't think others experienced it that way.
No.
Well, I think too that there were some major differences between Sandy and Ida that had us thinking differently about these weather experiences, and how they affected the community. I think Sandy was more globally challenging and problem creating for all of us, whereas because it was more of a rainstorm rather than the elevation in the river waters and things like that, I think that it was a much different experience, but it was kind of awakening that a severe rainstorm could cause some of the issues that happened with Ida.
I'm sort of would like to see how this proceeds, and is there going to be something like, this is what we can do? I'm hoping, like.
That's, yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's the direction that we're going. And maybe
Okay.
are there other folks who want to sort of speak to the results here that that want to mention other aspects? Again, the process is supposed to be, ideally, a part of a dialogue. Maybe Parisa, if you would go back to one slide for a second, just to remind folks. Yeah, so this is sort of like this is like what personally happened, right? So a lot of well-being seems like it comes up here. Well-being, issues that are scared, alone. I mean, impaired mobility, etc. And I think when if you go to the next slide 2, that some of that issue of well-being is recalled, but I think you start to see other pieces as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so here we're looking for kind of more clear observations of what happened in Community Board 8 in terms of like maybe the power outages that were mentioned in the previous slide and issues of access or traffic or like road blockages that happened, maybe like instances and observations of how, like what sorts of things they were, whatever you guys remember.
So this would be like sort of like, how long the power was out, other sort of like, what we describe as empirical observations, things like, how long did things happen, how much, and again, some of this might have been highlighted in.
Not sure how to do it. Short answer. I wrote something.
So you can submit several times here. You can write something, submit, and then write another, entry. So.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
so that's why.
maybe folks could help me out. It was I don't think the storm was a big issue in UES. If someone could
Upper East
Upper
Side.
East Side.
Sorry.
No
Sorry.
worries.
I just visit there. I don't live there, so I just work there. Great.
I think also living in a tall building, I don't know if this is true. I think it would be different than if you were living in a home with a basement and so on.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I have to admit, I mean, you all have graciously agreed to have us come in and so forth. There are certainly some communities, particularly out in Queens, with people living in basement apartments and so forth. I mean, they would have been, much more directly impacted, so to speak, if, to your point, Barbara. How about, yes.
Yeah, but we're aware that that we have to do something for climate to mitigate the climate changes. And so.
How about, yeah, absolutely. How about subways, subway disruptions?
Oh, yeah. The subways were flooded. I forgot about that. Subways were absolutely flooded, many of them, and you couldn't go down.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I actually see
They're
some.
mentioned, yeah.
Yeah.
Boaz, do you have a question, Boaz? Yes.
I just want to say a comment.
Yes, sure, please.
Okay, so first of all, super interesting topic. I don't know why. I mean, I just saw. I didn't see. Usually, through the Twitter account of Community Board, you guys are publishing those meetings far in advance. But this one, I think I saw like 20 minutes before the meeting. This is why I don't think that many people join. But I think this is a very, very hot topic. Double quadro in Upper East Side. Lots of people are interested. So, I mean, great stuff. I really like the interactive workshop that we have in our mobile that we can select. I came to New York in 2012 during Superstorm Sandy. I've been in Long Island. This is the first time that I saw something like that. It was a disaster. For a week, I didn't have electricity. And I heard that Broadway was still running in the city, so it made me mad. I was in Long Island, 50 minutes away from the city, and we didn't have gas, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have food. It was a disaster. In Upper East Side, where I live at the moment, in the last 10 years, since Superstorm Sandy, every year in New York City, in the city, they are saying there is going to be an historic storm. And I guess Ida was one of those historic storms, but it was peanuts considering to what Superstorm Sandy, at least from my perspective. I know people died, of course. Listen, people died in Ida and so on. But I think that the fact that the infrastructure is down below ground is very good. So
that's right. That's why it's saying they had electricity here.
And the only comment, I don't remember in Ida, this is, I guess you have people here in the community board that have been here for years, maybe they remember. I don't remember what they were saying about the subway. I think this was the mistake. They told people they can use the subway, maybe it was a different storm, and then people got stuck in the subway. I think that maybe next storm, they should tell people, don't use the subway, just wait for the storm to, close the subway. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not sure about that. That's my comment.
Yeah.
But
Thanks,
good
Boaz.
stuff.
We
Really, really good
appreciate
stuff.
you joining. That's great. Thank you so much.
If I may just say, you gave us good feedback. What happened is we had rescheduled it because it was interfering with the Ukrainian rally that was very important. We knew a lot of people would go. And that's why, and I don't think we had enough time to say, this is the new date. So thank you, Boaz. I think we'll work harder on making sure that the change of date comes out if this happens again. Thank you for saying that.
And I will say that, I don't know if you've missed my intro, that we're sort of off Broadway. Maybe we are off Broadway. We're still in rehearsals. If you like what you see, we'll refine it and bring it to a larger audience if you think it makes sense. But maybe we can move on. One of the things that we want to do is try to sort of bring, a process of like kind of group self-reflection in a sense of like trying to understand like how everyone is looking at this issue. And of course, we recognize that there's vastly different perspectives. But we also want to sort of start to sort of, merge some of those streams together to try to identify, some high profile issues that you collectively might want to work on and discuss as a group. So what we've done here, sort of in some background magic, is come up with sort of broader categories of issues, that people kind of in a distillation from some of the threads that were brought forward. And now we'd like to go through a ranking exercise and I'll turn it to Parisa to give us some specific instructions. But this will be a next step in the process. So please, Parisa.
So you should now see a new type of question that asks you to rank the following 5 impacts, like in order of like how important you think they are, what the number 1 importance, number 2 importance, number 3 importance is. And we will use that to kind of determine what impact we will be working on the next of, what will we choose as the first impact to work on the next of this workshop session.
So we'll give you some time to do your rankings, and then we'll move forward from there.
No. It's not taking. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It is.
And Parisa, if you can give me
So 6 people have participated.
Okay, so we're waiting for 2
so
more.
far. Yeah, 2 more at least. So.
Okay.
But it looks like transportation issues.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Mine are more emotional.
Well, it's. Oh my God! Oh, this is it's a close race. I think we've got maybe. Yeah. So it's really interesting. So we've got, we put forward 5 possibilities, and I think that what we'll see is that they're all fairly well ranked, although emotional stress is sort of like somewhat least ranking. But there is what it illustrates is pretty disparate sort of perspectives on this, which I think, again, part of the objective, just to sort of reveal a little bit of our thinking here, is that as you look at this, you'll recognize that it's pretty wide distribution. Like there's no real consensus, that you as a group are pretty widely just divided. Not divided, it's too strong a word, but you have widely varying views on what some of the main issues are to sort of look at. I think for our purposes for the moment, we'll look at transportation issues first, and then sort of move forward, and depending on time, we could tease into the other ones as well. But how do people feel about these overall results? Are there any sort of reflections on that? I mean, one that they sort of pretty widely distributed.
I think they are. Personally, I think they would be pretty obvious. I mean, these are, I don't, I guess I'm the only one that said emotional distress. I'm embarrassed. But I think that they're pretty, these were the issues. This is what I'd have caused.
Great. Okay. So we've captured that. I mean, I guess, not that we've, recreated the wheel or sort of recreated the knowledge that you had, but at least it sort of reflects it back. In part, what we're trying to do is create a mirror, right? We're sort of, reflecting back to you what you all as a group think collectively. And it seems to, have at least have done that. But why don't we'll step into the issue of transportation, and then we'll move forward with that as an impact. So in this sort of discussion, one of the things, so we're talking about these sort of transportation problems, issues, outages, et cetera. And this is where we'll do a little interlude here describing some of the things we want to look at. there's a couple of terms that we'll kind of investigate when we look at transportation challenges, problems, et cetera, associated with Hurricane Ida. And then, how to sort of address them moving forward. So one, you can look at, transportation vulnerability or impacts on vulnerability as a particular hazard, like what the length of disruption, the amount of disruption that comes with a flooding like this kind of event. That's also coupled with this idea of the likelihood, like what's the likelihood of the probability of this? And that's connected to that term risk, right? So we're going to be talking about these two terms moving forward, like risk as an idea of likelihood, connected to what's the likelihood of a hazard occurring. So here we have the graphic of there's a shark out there as a hazard, and what's the likelihood that the probability or the risk that you're actually going to be affected by it. And then what we want to try to understand, and this gets into the issues of adaptation, like what you've kind of collectively recognized that that transportation issues from Ida were a concern, and then you start to reflect on why did this hazard occur? Like what was the issue? And what we can start to sort of tease out is that there might be a range of different reasons and factors or causes. And we use this word of causes, and some might be background, like how our transportation system is structured in the city. It's all subways, it's or some surface stuff, but what are the sort of the larger structural kind of conditions? Even sort of larger things like the subway system, the MTA, has been chronically underfunded. It hasn't, it's been trying to upgrade its resilience practice, but really, it's still highly vulnerable. So that's kind of the broader background. And then more specifically is the context. And this is typically associated, with policies that the MTA might have, or, other sorts of specific things that deal with flooding events, and how they've tried to manage resilience, particularly since Hurricane Sandy. So the background is the broader. The context is sort of typically the policy space in which that thing operates, and the immediate has to do with like when it occurred, how much rain occurred, at what time of day, even like was there a specific substation or part of the subway system that was compromised that shut the rest of it down, et cetera, et cetera. So as we look forward into this discussion, we'll look for background issues, context issues, and immediate causal issues, and sort of more broadly looking at questions of risk and hazard. So those are just a couple of things to sort of think about as we move forward. And I'll turn it back to Parisa.
So yeah, so in the next question, now you should see a sliding scale of like ranking between low and high of what for the impact of transportation issues, what do you think the hazard level and the risk level for, in the case of Hurricane Ida, were?
So, yeah. And so again, we're going back to those terms. So risk would be like, when Hurricane Ida occurred, or now still, what is the risk level? Like how probable, is this going to happen again? And what's the hazard level? Like, what's the particular event that will occur? The disruption.
And a question that I have, would the hazard be merely whether you'll be hurt, or what effect it would have on?
Great question. What we're looking for in this case generally is the community, but you can also, infer yourself in there as well. But it's.
Let's think of economic. If you can't get to work,
yes,
particularly before COVID,
right.
This was people going into the office and they couldn't get there.
Yeah, it's kind of an accumulation of all of the different types of like economic and the emotional, the stress, that like not being able to get to places, disruption of your daily life, that like the general impact that it had, and like what the level of that was.
So I think some of the transportation risks, I don't even know if I fully understand. For example, If you're down in the subway and it floods and the water comes up, is that water electrified because of the tracks? I mean, I don't know some of the answers to these questions. I would think that that would create a huge hazard in terms of being, say, in a let's say subway environment while the flooding was happening. Is that the kind of thing you mean in terms of hazards and how dangerous it potentially could be? And then as far as the risk, anytime that we have a heavy rainfall in a short period of time, I think that the New York is at risk. Am I understanding the questions correctly?
Yes, well, it's excellent questions. I think, well, specific for hazards, we're looking at, as Parisa has mentioned, sort of a composite, and I recognize that that can be crude, and maybe this is an issue that we need to look at because there are multiple sort of hazard issues. I mean, there's economic loss connected to inability to get to work as a hazard. What you described as the electrification issue is a catastrophic health issue, health threat. So we're looking at a composite, which might not be fair, but that's the ambition. And then risk is more specific to the community itself. All right. So you're thinking about what's the likelihood of this impacting community board 8, more specifically. And one of the things we tried to highlight, it's like it's not historically in the city's high flood zone, right? And so it becomes the city has defined it as a low risk probability simply because of that. But maybe that's not a fair characterization of what you all are experiencing within the neighborhood. I don't know if that's helping you.
So I think what I was trying to kind of vet out in terms of hazard, I don't think any of us are really concerned about being swept off the roadway, that kind of thing that you might have in a rural community during a storm situation. Hazard for us is very different.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, one of the framings of PELT is that, we can, we're asking you all to interpret it relative to your own experience, right? So it's not necessarily comparative in that context. It's really sort of what you're experiencing in your community.
Yes. I think we can move on to the next question. We have 9 responses. So
sure.
So the next question is continuing from the conversation we had before, now kind of trying to get at the causes of what the transportation issue was caused by, and what do you think played more of a role? The background causes, the more rooted background structural issues, or the immediate causes of what exactly this storm was, like that it was a lot of rain, and or how prepared or unprepared the community was. And for this one, I would kind of try to ask you to try to score it in a way that the sum of the 3 scores you give kind of end around 10. So, kind of try to divide 10 between your 3 scores. Wow. As an exercise to kind of try to rank which one was more important.
Right. So again, to recap, I mean, the issue of causes, we're looking at these different, so the structural of these sort of larger things about how the MTA is organized and how we're subway dependent or, other public transit dependent. Context has to do more with specific risk management strategies that the city has proposed or you think has proposed, and immediate, the specifics of the event itself. And of course, the objective here is to, again, providing a mirror to sort of provide you opportunity to sort of collectively see how you all kind of look at this question a little bit differently, and to sort of understand what the implications of that difference might be.
By asking us to go to 10, to me, they're mutually exclusive. I had trouble with this question because, I mean, the first question, I would have given it a 10 with the first question.
Well, it's an interesting. If we were doing this live, it would be what we've tried to do with Mentimeter is to replace something that we do a little bit differently live. But the idea here, of course, is that the cause of anything is going to be a function of a variety of factors, right? And that what we're trying to look at is not only the strength of any one factor, but how it compares to the other factors. So that sort of, I recognize it's a little artificial to say keep it to 10, but the idea that we want to sort of look at the relative weight and the differences between how people respond. Like some people might think, oh my God, it's all because of the MTA and the structure of the public transit. And other people will say, no, it has, the cause is really just the storm itself. But I do recognize that it makes it more complicated, Barbara. So it's something that we're trying to work on.
Because I see the causes that we have subways, which means it's underneath, and they don't have, I know there was talk about getting rain collectors, which we don't have. We have a very old subway, but it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the event. So,
right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, but the event, reveals these issues, I guess, is sort of the way to think about it. So how are we doing, Parisa?
I think we're at a good point with this one too. So now we're at the point of transitioning to.
Can we go back one sec?
Yeah.
So I just want to highlight, so, in general, again, across the sample, that what we have, a lot of people sort of focus on these sort of deeper structural issues, which of course, kind of, again, preluding to what we're going to go to next is like, what can we really do about this risk and this hazard? Obviously structural are deeper, embedded, issues that by definition become potentially more challenging. Not too far behind was policy, so that's an interesting, that's where a lot of things work in that space. The less focus on immediate causes, so it's kind of interesting, but interesting profiles certainly across each one of them. So we'll hold that for the moment. We're going to transition into this next space to sort of ask, well, what can we do about flood hazard, flood risk, and this is just sort of like a simple composite. Like after Hurricane Sandy, there was a lot of focus in the city of New York about any number of different sorts of things that were proposed, and some of these are still ongoing. And it's literally 10 years on. We have like deep structural defenses that are being built in and around the city. A lot of money has been spent. Individuals have been, not so much in Manhattan, but in the outer boroughs. If you go out to Broad Channel, places like that, people are raising their houses. They're basically put them on stilts and put them up one story. There's a whole focus on nature-based solutions, like creating buffers against flooding and to be flexible. To put up berms or other sorts of structures to absorb some water action, wave action. And then, of course, you see the graphic on the left, particularly in the coastal zone. Now, of course, Ida wasn't what was challenging about Ida is that it's not a coastal event per se, but it's a flooding event. But, certainly the coastal environment presents a lot of challenges in terms of like how to deal with things like increased sea level rise and implications of more frequent flooding. And you can see that the range of different perspectives, everything from the top that do nothing and you got increased damage, so increased hazard and risk, to build a big barrier to protect, to accommodate, to raise, to advance, to sort of basically push out into the water which is some of the proposals in the city of New York, to retreat from the water's edge, which also have been increasingly discussed, or use some of these ecosystem-based strategies to sort of attenuate, move, and then use ecosystem-based strategies to attenuate wave actions. So what this sort of reveals is like there's a multiple sorts of potential avenues for adaptation. And what we're trying to do in this exercise is to, one, sort of look at in the transportation issue, excuse me, some of the particular causes that you've identified. Now we're going to shift over into the space of like, where do we want this particular risk and hazard to be in the future? So this is the opportunity now to sort of, okay, we've got a sense of what we faced, what the risk and potential of that, the risk and the hazard that we're currently facing and what's causing it. How do we want the future to look in comparison? So let's go to the next slide, Parisa, and she'll carry us through this conversation.
Yeah, so this is a space to have that discussion of like, what do we think about different adaptation strategies, that especially since what the first exercise showed us is that a combination of background and context causes are apparently playing a strong role here. So how would an adaptation strategy possibly answer that? And then the next question would be how that adaptation strategies would possibly shift hazard and risk. So if you want or see fit, we could do that one before we do this too. So
yeah, I mean, well, let's pause for a moment. I mean, how did people feel about like the notion of that you know, for the most part, the group like looked at you know, the causes to be structural and sort of context specific, so associated with policy. So now the question is like, you know, are there certain things that you're thinking about or that you would like to think about that where you could address those causes and reduce the hazard and reduce the risk?
Well, I think one of the things, and there were great differences happening between Sandy and Ida. What I saw happening with Ida is that it really brought out how secure and how tight different buildings were in terms of the impact of the severe rain, in terms of leakage and how secure was the roof of the building and how good were the drainage systems set up. And so that was a much different experience because you were doing top down with Ida, whereas Sandy was water coming up and over, which is a whole different set of.
And wind, that was the wind.
Yeah, wind was huge too. Great point. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, so they were two very traumatizing, but in different ways, experiences for the community. And so that's why I'm kind of balancing a little bit of, so I live on Roosevelt Island. Sandy was much worse over here for us, whereas some of the drainage issues and what came up in Manhattan because of the sudden severe rain and wind created much different issues for people in Manhattan. And so so there's different needs for the different areas of the community in terms of these different types of storms. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight, so as some of them, you know, like with Sandy, they had some of the same issues as far as the water coming up and above, you know, and going up into the streets, like we had here with the flooding, because we're on that lower plane, but then we didn't have some of the other issues that they had in Manhattan. So I'm just kind of trying to touch notes with some of the different issues within the community.
Bill, I think that one of the things, and we haven't had enough, Lynn and I talk about quite a bit, is different ways of mitigating. And as I explained, we try to deal with the different committees. So, for instance, the Parks Committee, what we do know is that the more green space we have, and maybe types of green space that we have, will help, absorb huge amounts of water. It's not easy answers, though. We know that if every one of our old buildings can raise their mechanicals out of the basement, like my building evidently lost, cost thousands of dollars, that they ruined certain things. It didn't affect us as tenants, but there was some damage done because of the flooding that went in. I wouldn't even know how to begin to answer this question. I don't know if others can. I could give simple answers. I would like the subways to not get flooded, but I keep thinking of how do you do it.
Well, and I think just recently, we're hearing about these different storms that are coming through, and some of the time they'll tell us, oh, if we're going to have severe rain and potentially flooding, and then the storm passes us. So it's still kind of a little confusing on how do you prepare for what seems to be still very unexpected weather events.
But I think we have to prepare by changing, changing our environment. I mean, that's the short term. Do we go down in the basement, or do we hide under a bed or something? But the long term is, which is what our environment committee is supposed to do, is to, with the other committees like housing and parks and so on, and transportation, what can be done.
So let's go to Andrew. He has his hand up.
Right.
Hi, this has been such an interesting exercise and discussion, and I'm really happy we're talking about adaptation and sort of remediation steps we can take. And it's also really important that we prevent new damage from being inflicted into our environment, because as we all know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in our city, 70% of our climate change pollution comes from the buildings that we have. And so one area that we'll really need to focus on is decarbonization of our buildings, both in terms of our office buildings, but also in terms of our shorter residential buildings as well. And then we also have to stop, and I've been advocating for a while for this 210-foot height cap for climate change purposes, which I'm sure you've all heard about. And our guest today even was kind enough, he heard me last time talk about this, but above 210 feet and above 100 feet and then above 210 feet, there seems to be an exponential rise in greenhouse gas emissions, and the urban heat island is exacerbated, which means that the ground temperature between the buildings gets hotter, which traps particulate matter in the air, and it worsens our respiratory health and our cardiovascular health. And it also raises the ocean and ocean levels and river levels. So it's really important that we put a limit on the height of these new buildings, because we keep getting sold this myth that we can just build very, very tall and all our problems will be solved and it will be LEED certified, no worries. And again, we see that the LEED certified buildings, or the buildings that even get an A rating in terms of their environmental rating, are actually horrible greenhouse gas emissions producers. Even buildings that, I really respect him, but former Vice President Al Gore signed off on and said that it was, the way of the future. They've measured those buildings years later and they're awful for the environment. So I understand that it's going to be really hard because the way oil controls Texas, real estate controls New York. But if we're going to be real about preventing even more damage into our environment, we got to put a limit ASAP. And there's still plenty of building that can be done, plenty of affordable housing that can be brought in under a 210-foot height cap. The argument we often hear is that if we put a height cap on, then we're going to lose our affordable housing. But guess what? We've already lost 14,000 rent stabilized units in this build tall to the sky approach, because the affordable units that we actually have are knocked down for luxury towers that then go empty anyway, only for developers to say, well, we got to build taller, that's the solution. And then it just gets worse and worse. So I am looking forward to hearing other remediation and preventative measures as well, but that's just my 2 cents.
One thing, thank you so much. I know there's another hand up. You guys have come up with a whole series of really I mean, small to large potential actions. I want to pass back to the co-chairs in terms of process. We could dwell more on these suggestions and the hands up, which is certainly fine. We do have a couple of other steps to take that speak about sort of, how much, or how to affect this kind of change. But I'll give it back to the co-chairs to give us
I'd like
guidance.
to ask, Lynn, do you want to call on people?
Yeah, so actually Boaz put his hand down, so why don't we move forward, and then so we don't have any hands raised at the moment. So let's go ahead and move forward, and then if he wants to ask a question going forward, we'll come back.
Okay. Yeah, and if Boaz wants to bring forward his comment, I'm sorry if I had a too early intervention. I just want to make sure we don't hold you guys up too long. But as you kind of toggle through, and maybe as Parisa can scroll along, you've got a series of very specific strategies like early warning systems or alert systems, information distribution, dissemination information, and giving workers a day off. I mean, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff here. We're going to come back to this. We'll catalog it and of course make it available to you. But I'm going to give it back to Parisa to sort of carry us forward. Taking these things, maybe scroll to the top so folks can see things again. I mean, so larger things like better fund, New York City Transit, right? That's sort of the larger, structural issue. But then, more proximate stuff like, early warning systems. So maybe to you, Parisa.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. So we definitely saw an interesting range of responses here. And so based on this range of responses that kind of illustrate a future scenario of how these possible adaptation actions could shape a more desirable future of risk and hazard. Now think back again to according to the responses that you just put out, how would this shift the level of risk and hazard of an event like Ida in the future?
And to maybe play out this a little bit further, if implemented, I mean, what would you hope would be the future risk and hazard? Recognizing, the bigger the hope, the bigger the challenge in achieving it.
Do we have to add up to 10 again or not?
No, that's only for the cause questions,
Yeah.
not for this one.
So the assumption, that we're looking at, of course, is that you want to look forward to a less risky, less hazardous future, right? And so these approaches that you're promoting will bring that to the community.
So I think somebody brought up an interesting comment in the previous slide about price gouging during crises. And I just wanted to make a comment about that because I had someone just yesterday say to me that when they had the subway shooting, that neighborhood where they were addressing the subway incident, the car services were charging people a premium to either pick up or drop off in that area because they were taking advantage of the situation of the subway being shut down in that area.
Right.
And I think that was kind of an interesting point that somebody made in the previous slide, where that's the kind of thing I think that as a community board, we can get in front of that type of crisis management and say that, during a flooding crisis, you can't price gouge people who need to get either to work or to, get food or whatever into their homes. And so I think that that's the kind of thing that is the lower hanging fruit in terms of us trying to do something within the public area, where some of these things that affect different buildings and different blocks differently, it gets a little harder to figure out how to mitigate that particular situation. So I just wanted to.
It's a really good point. And I was actually I was thinking about that, the subway shooting. I think, if I remember correctly, that Lyft and Uber gave I think they gave some discounts, or they gave some money back, or, something.
Back, right.
But I mean, maybe there needs to.
Initially, I heard they were charging people as
They
much as
were.
$80
Yes.
just to get in that area, which it's a middle and lower income area. That's horrible that they would do that to those people in that community.
But I think it brings up this point. I mean, again, what we're looking at is transportation, disruption as a hazard, and the likelihood of that, and what can be done to mitigate that in Community Board 8. And so, that's a very specific policy intervention. Obviously, maybe it's not something specific to Community Board 8, but to sort of, how car service fees can be controlled or regulated during times of crisis. It's an interesting policy issue. Let me return for a moment back to this issue of risk and hazard. So again, what we're looking for, or what we're trying to engage in conversation, the idea that the risk, what's the likelihood? So the assumption from IDA, and currently still, because not much has been done, let's say, since IDA, there's a certain level of risk associated with a disruption of the subway service or transit capabilities. And the idea is that we're looking into the future, that we want to reduce that likelihood, reduce that probability, so reduce that risk. Same, we want to not only reduce the likelihood, but if it does occur, it might not be as impactful. Maybe the subway won't be out for as long, or maybe there won't be as much disruption, or car services will be able to sort of fill in a gap at least a little bit. So we want to reduce. The assumption is we want to also affect the hazard level as well. So that's what this question is getting toward. Like, what future do you collectively want? And that's kind of the objective here. So, Parisa, how are we doing in total?
I think we have our responses for this question. So now the last one, the causes. And so, before we start with this, I just wanted to point out that in the adaptation actions that you guys put out, you had a range of adaptation actions. Some really addressed the kind of root causes, like being anticipating versus reacting, or major infrastructure funding. So they really kind of changed the level that root causes will impact, or some of were very context heavy. So the people could travel less, early warning systems were all policy suggestions that could either influence the context, or early warning systems change the immediate exposure to events. So kind of keep those in mind, the suggestions that were given, as you think about what the future scenario for causes will look like.
Yeah, and here it gets, there's a concept behind this, and not to get overly burdened by concept and theory, but the assumption is that as you discuss various adaptation possibilities, you're going to change the composition of what might cause some sort of failure in the future. You initially said that in general it was because there were structural issues and there were context-specific issues, but the issue now is, and less so for immediate. And do you want that composition to change, right? We're not necessarily speaking about the risk level or the hazard level, but if an event happens in the future, what would you want to be able to say is the cause? So for example, immediate causes, it's literally the size of the event. And that's the insurance and the reinsurance industry sort of says, act of nature, act of God, it's we can't control it. It's just it's going to happen. So we'd say it's that's the immediate cause. There's nothing, structural or background or context specific that's at play. Other people will say, it's how, our society is organized, and that's, it's really hard to change. So we want to, look into the future, like how would you like that, the various causes to shift or maybe remain the same from what you think they are now. Okay, we've got a couple more.
Yeah, a
What
couple more.
policy, I assume you mean like closing down very quickly. I mean, things that
Sure.
the government will
Yeah.
do and all of that.
Yeah,
Where the first one is actually the subway stations, for instance, or the
correct.
is going through.
Right. So we're
Or
not,
even,
Drainage system.
Drainage,
exactly,
right,
yeah.
Subway,
Right.
on the street level, how they're doing roofs.
yeah.
Well, roofs wouldn't be the transportation necessarily.
Right. Right. Unless you're saying that, like, there is the conversation about creating water retention or
That's right.
detention structures on roofs to slow the amount of street level flooding.
Exactly.
Okay. Are we good to go ahead, Parisa?
I'm compiling the results now, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So so I think, one of the things that we're sort of moving toward the last phases of the project or of the exercise. You guys have been extremely patient and helpful. And, again, thank you so much. What we've tried to do in this arc here is to sort of reflect the process of bringing all the different perspectives that you have had on, like, what happened during Hurricane Sandy, and then kind of elevating one of what seems to be like a critical part, but there are many others, that are part of the issue. I mean, transportation popped up, well-being also was important. Other factors kind of emerged as well. And then trying to sort of look into, like, where we are now, with respect to, the post-event context, but really more importantly, how does your collective understanding now of what happened and what adaptation strategies might sort of highlight opportunities to move forward, and sort of in that space. And I think, Parisa, are we able to sort of, try to get into that space at this point?
I need 1 more minute, sorry.
Okay, no worries. So, again, in a full treatment of PELT, we would probably be able to go through, the top 3 or the top 4, or, all the full set of 5. We're just going to do this one this evening, the transportation. Again, in our envisioning of PELT, it could take, several of these sessions to sort of go through each one of them and to sort of reveal different sort of policy initiatives. So we'll making some headway on transportation. So maybe, Parisa, just give us a heads up when you think we're good to go. I'll say one other thing about Mentimeter. Mentimeter, I don't know if people have used Mentimeter before, but it's a program that's, there is a kind of a free version that you can play around with it. And then there are, we actually have purchased the rights to this sort of more advanced version, but it does provide capacity to sort of do a lot of comparisons and sort of crowd share information and perspectives rather quickly.
Sorry, I don't know why it's not showing up. Maybe I should give it a minute for it to upload fully.
Okay. So what do you what we'll see?
Okay.
Okay. Why don't you take us through this, Parisa?
Okay, so this is the 2 graphs that you guys responded, the compilation of your responses from what do you think about the current stages of hazard and risk versus what you want them to be in the future. In both, both of them are pretty similar, but it indicates that you want to both lower the level of risk and the level of hazard, meaning how much damage such an event could cause and how exposed you'd be to that damage. For example, things like you would want to, how much damage could be caused by the subway not working. Like some of the responses for that was people could take the day off work or something like that, or how exposed the subway would be to flooding.
Right. And or and health risks. I mean, like we talked about. So I mean, we could pause for a moment and what do you all think about these sort of results? I mean, you're I would say you're not you're bold, but not overly bold in terms of your ambitions, your policy ambitions. Does that reflect what you're thinking about, where you'd like the community board to go?
I think I misinterpreted. I thought it was how likely do I think things would change. So I think, so I don't think I voted the way that maybe I should have voted.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, given the sample, it probably didn't make a big difference. I mean, obviously, if a lot of people responded that way, and that's a problem that we'll need to address to make that more clear. But it's really what we're looking for here is to sort of say, okay, what's the current level of risk? What's the current, potential impact or hazard of the transportation disruption from a large flooding event? And then, where do you, the community board collectively want to be in the future? So you definitely want to reduce the hazard level and reduce the risk level. But, I don't want to say the word not aggressive, but I guess I just did. But I mean it to an extent, but not like you're not talking about a large, some big transformative changes that you want to develop. Is that a fair statement? For the group.
I thought it looked like we were mildly optimistic that we could do some positive change. Is how I interpreted it.
I was half fulling and you were half empty and you were half fulling. Okay, I love it. Okay, great. No, maybe I'm being, thank you. So maybe we'll go on to the next one. So maybe we're having issues with the, oh, nope.
No, I have no idea why it's not showing up.
Oh, did I get something?
No, it's beginning it on the screen, so.
Interesting. We haven't had
an up thumb and a down thumb. Is that right? Is that what everybody else sees? Oh,
yes, that is what you should be seeing. But like you should be seeing, we should be seeing the results on the screen here. I don't know why we're not. I can maybe share it another way.
Do you want to just talk through?
Yeah, maybe we'll.
Because I'd like some time for some discussion.
Sure.
Want it? Yeah. What it's
so
doing.
Of course, in the comparison between the causes between current and future, we can see that maybe you could just
toggle back.
Switch the share for a minute because I can share it on another screen here. So this is what we can see for the difference between current and future causes. So I think one interesting thing is that like this does kind of match up with what the adaptation actions that you guys suggested, that there's still the focus is on policy risk management and strategy, kind of making a shift in the context causes and coming up with maybe policies that could change the exposure of how community board 8 will be like exposed to these risks and hazards. So this could be, the purpose here is that like this could be used as a starting point to have a discussion on what types of adaptation would be a good fit, like between different types of adaptation, like transformative adaptation, flexible adaptation, or like bulkheading infrastructural projects. This could be a step to kind of open that conversation. And I think what we would suggest and intend to do is to go through this for several impacts to get a more holistic idea of the impact level of an event. So if you want to continue the conversation from this point on, I would.
Yeah, why don't we do that? I think in this particular comparison, I think is important, but I think, by, trying to reduce it to numbers less than 10 makes it complicated. So why don't we, I think your interpretation is correct, and let's go to the other slide process, but that we want to focus on some of these contextual issues, like to address some of the concerns, the adaptation concerns that you guys have raised. So maybe go back to
So now do you see should be seeing question 10, which is, we want to focus on what is needed to affect the changes.
Right. So now we're in a space where we want to very briefly, and I recognize the time, so we're going to, I think, rapidly close this and then use time for evaluation. But in these next questions, maybe you can just toggle very quickly ahead, Carissa.
These are the 2 questions remaining.
Yeah, these are the last 2. So we can go. So it's like, what resources? So what is needed to affect this change? And then what are the resources and capacity that are needed to affect this change? So we would do a discussion here, again, similarly, to sort of, bring forward from the group. Okay, we focus on transportation risk. We've identified certain levels of engagement that we want to address. We've identified some policy solutions that we want to focus on. So what do we need, like, to sort of try to put these things into effect? Like, what is the, do we need a study? Do we need, additional resources? Do we need, engage with other community boards to sort of see, reach out, network, what is needed to sort of like, get to the point where these sorts of policy options. And the last question focuses on, well, how do we gain those resources? How do we gain that capacity, if we don't have it already, or does the community have it? So again, back to the co-chairs, I mean, those are sort of the spaces, the final steps of this. Recognizing the time, I want to, be very much cognizant of that. We could close the conversation here and the quote unquote, the beta test, with the assumption that, we kind of have an idea of what you all might be responding. And then we'd have conversations around this point and slide 11, which is on, resources and capacity. So let me pause for a moment and see where you would like to be. I feel like we could close it soon, if you'd like, and then open it up for some additional evaluation.
I think that would be good. Lynn, do you see any hands?
No, I don't. But I think that Andrew raised some really valuable points in terms of policy, and we're a real estate driven culture in New York, and trying to balance need against greed tends to be problematic as far as what's necessary for making things a little better. And, I think that those are some of the things that make the strongest impact on us being able to make positive changes.
Right. Yeah, so that strikes at the heart of sort of like, it was a really big issues, I'll give you one thread of a minor example. Then we also have some evaluation questions if we want to go to those. But like in the city of Miami, their bargain is based similarly on real estate development, because their tax base is capped at a certain level, and the only way that they can get operating funds is to increase real estate development, which is basically counterintuitive to the issue of risk exposure, because they're low elevation. Right. They're just building right along the water's edge, because that's higher value. So it's this absolutely dysfunctional sort of relationship in terms of risk and hazard and risk reduction. So, but these are larger structural issues. But to the group's, I want to honor the group's sort of perspective. I mean, those are profound issues. That being said, you also brought forward, these sort of lower level, like, the adjusting the fares of ride shares, adjusting, promoting early warning systems and so forth. So there's a range of different options that you can play out. So again, it's really, I want to turn control to the co-chairs and to the group of how you want to use your time now. But I don't want to use up too much more. And in terms of our exercise, I think we can close it down. We can go, we have these evaluation questions if you want to use that. But we've had some evaluations along the way.
We could do is that what you would like, is for us to talk about the tool itself?
Yeah. I mean, for a few minutes.
Well, the one criticism I have, I think your wording, if it's for a more general group, maybe make more, I hate to say dumbed down, but
Sure.
I found sometimes I didn't quite understand it. And, I understood it more when you were explaining it, but then it goes slower. I think if you want it to go a little faster, I think some of the wording can be better.
Got it.
We are struggling as an environment committee, working with the other committees to say, how do we get people? We sort of know, and if you listen to the news or read the news, you sort of know what things are going on. I hate to pick on, there's two people on here that I would love to talk. One, Andrew, I want to have more conversations with Andrew. There's other committees fighting for the height limits, but there's other things of the heat islands that affect everything that we can talk to. Boaz, I don't know if he knows, but I know Boaz is Israeli, and I heard a lecture about how in the desert they're able to collect. They do get rain, but more like our itis. I gather they get huge like surges of rain.
Yeah, flash flooding.
They have some sort of, I don't know if Boaz wants to comment, but they have some sort of collection methods that I wish.
Yeah. Like cisterns or something.
It almost looked like a pan, but it had to be more than a pan. It was a fascinating lecture that I heard. So we are trying to think of what are the different areas, and here we could talk about what the city is trying to do and what can be done. So the committees that I think are very important is parks. We know green spaces is so important. We know the type of trees and things like that are just, and I'm so glad Barry is on because he's co-chair of the Parks Committee. The housing. There's so many things that the housing can do, not only green roofs, but there's, maybe changing to the air conditioning system. I heard what they're putting in NYCHA is something you just plug in and it can air condition or warm an entire room. How will that affect electricity? How much would that save? What can we do even in terms of bulbs, things like that? What are some of the simple things that may have real effect on it? Drainage system, transportation, we could go on because DOT is not only in charge of the subways and buses, but also the streets. So one of the things that I'm curious about are some things called rain gardens that we have, one on First Avenue and 87th Street, and what effect they have and how do they choose where it's supposed to be and what if we had more of them and so on. So I think that what you've done is identify some problems, and I know Roosevelt Island is doing amazing work.
So it's getting away from that, but one of the discussions that I had with someone today is in terms of city planning, both Manhattan and some of the boroughs, in terms of how they're growing. And there really isn't a concrete city collective plan for these types of things that at least if there is the community, like we don't know about what they are. I don't know what they are. and we grow the city kind of organically in a non-productive way for some of these specific issues. And how to do that better, I think is what we need to try to do in some of these community boards.
Well, one of the things that, I mean, this is absolutely fabulous feedback and reflection. I think there are some questions in the evaluation screen. If people have a moment to do that, that would be helpful. But I think the crucial thing for us is, circling back to the very beginning, is that, Hurricane Ida, as with any extreme weather event, as with any extreme event in our lives, becomes sort of a window into a larger discussion of, like, why did that happen? What to do about it? How to is there anything that we can do in the future to prevent that from happening, or even be better prepared, or resolve it in some profound way? I mean, not to get too, philosophical, but, our lives are full of, unfortunately, these sort of events, the nature of human existence, sort of. But the question that we have designed Pelt around is like, well, how can we best learn? How can we facilitate learning at the community level to bring forward issues that you're thinking about, and create a mirror, that you could then look into, and then use as a way of reflecting, what you as a group want to try to achieve. So, I mean, these larger things that you've raised, like urban heat islands and sort of, design, building designs issues, I mean, are very much, while somewhat different from the more specific question of transportation, really, in some ways, sort of, I think from my perspective, further evidence that maybe the Pelt exercise has at least, generated that conversation, which is useful. If we had fully fleshed out some of the pieces here, on like what capacities we could get into a dialogue, a discussion about, okay, so, this is what we want to create, mitigate urban heat island. Well, what are steps that we can do? Like, what are the resources that are needed, and what are the avenues? So there's an element that it's designed to be somewhat transformative, to empower, the participants to, get into those discussions. But again, we don't have to say that we got there, but at least I'm excited to hear you guys having these conversations.
Very interesting. I don't know if I'd be interested in other criticism. My only criticism, I found some of the wording, I wasn't sure what you meant.
Well, I had to, the academics always have to do that a little bit, but I guess I got to make it even,
Think of me when you do it.
No, I know.
PhD students.
No, I'm teasing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've actually gone through a couple of iterations trying to, make it more accessible and less jargony, which is like the academic problem.
And I honestly, if we were to take this questionnaire and literally go through neighborhood by neighborhood in our district, I think we would have much different answers depending upon what street, what building, what block.
Building I found with Ida.
Because people's experiences are so dramatically different, block to block.
Right. No, that's a huge point. And I guess one of the challenges is that, we've designed this to sort of be an intervention, quote unquote, with a particular community. And of course, you all representative are a very specific slice of that community, but you're bounded by your own definition, like you're the environmental committee and community board 8. So those are, you're a small subset of a much larger community, and how to translate this to sort of other spaces, or, one could theoretically do this on a building level as well, like,
right.
Do the same exercise.
And we want to work with the housing committee as an example, and the transportation committee and the parks committee.
Well, to your point, Barbara, I mean, it could be that, again, if this conversation was in any way useful, or even a modified version, if we could come up with maybe an exercise where you could bring in, I know you've got, I think, some of the housing folks on this call, but maybe the heads of all the folks, to sort of come together to have conversations. I don't know if that would be a useful exercise. It might be, something you don't need us to help with, but that's something that could be done.
We could be in touch and see what to do.
Yeah.
We'll see what to do. Does anybody else? We would love to hear from anybody else. Lynn, your eyes are better than mine. And can
Yeah,
see.
no, I think we have some people who have appreciated our discussion today. Wendy or Andrew, did you have any comments that you'd like to make?
As you're thinking again, I want to really big, sincere thank yous to you.
Oh, thank you. You've been
No, we appreciate
both
you guys.
times. We're so happy
Thank
to
you so
come
much.
back. Thank you.
And we can send you the results of the suggestions that you guys had, which I think were quite rich, and some of the other results. Anything that you want, we could make available.
Thank you. Great. Wendy? Was it Wendy that was unmuted?
So actually, no, Andrew and Wendy did a clapping hands, which I'll take as they appreciated our presentation. Okay, so Andrew's got his hand up now, so let's go to Andrew. Thank you.
We definitely were applauding and clapping, and I think Wendy will probably want to speak after me, but I just wanted to reiterate thank you for holding this forum, and that I'm in total agreement. Climate change isn't just like some off to the side issue. It is really foundational to housing, to parks, to economics, to culture. It really is going to shape everything. And luckily for us, there's also a pathway to creating renewed prosperity if we address climate change, not only in preventing further and future damage, which is quite costly to the tune of billions of dollars, but investing in areas that have traditionally been left out. And so I know we often talk about climate change and fear, but really where there's the potential for great problem, there's also the potential for great opportunity to build things better than it was before. I just have a quick question, because I always like to leave on an actionable note and not just doom and gloom. And so I don't know if Dr. Selecki will be able to answer this, but we've been talking a lot about maybe some of the faults of New York City in our response to climate change. Are there any cities either nationwide or worldwide that are really doing a better job of tackling the climate crisis?
Great question. New York is, 10 years ago, New York was out front. Don't quote me, I'm the former New York City panel on climate change co-chair, but I think they've lost a little bit of ground. Is there one city that's doing more than others? I think what you'll find is that there are a variety of cities that are really advancing in certain spaces, right? So, places like London, places like Paris doing a lot, even like Quito, Ecuador, there's I know, some, in terms of cooling, like, Tel Aviv is really focused on like promoting, street level cooling and urban vegetation, as well as other cities, in North Africa, Middle East. So it kind of depends on, and of course, if you're talking about flooding, it's Rotterdam or, places like that. So it's sort of become a little bit, and if you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, it's Copenhagen. If bike sharing, it's Copenhagen. So it really, it's splintered, I guess, is what I would say. Like, some cities are known for certain things, but there's no one, like, baseball, like, the five tool player, the guy who does the person who does everything. There's not as much of that right now in the city realm.
Interesting.
So Wendy's got her hand up. If we could go to Wendy.
Wendy, confirm unmuted.
Yep. You are.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said, was I unmuted?
Yeah, I thought I heard that.
Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm working on an ancient computer. Thanks for bearing with me while I'm hitting the unmute button repeatedly. Listen, I love, this was a really magnificent presentation, and I really appreciate the co-chairs as well. And the technology was very helpful and wonderful in bringing people in and giving us some kind of a voice. I love looking through the lens of transportation because we're 3 islands and a peninsula, a very vulnerable coastal city. We don't think of ourselves that way. We think of ourselves as this impenetrable granite fortress in Broadway, the center of the universe. And that's a wonderful spirit to have, but it also works to our detriment because we don't often like to face our vulnerability. We think of Ida and Sandy as being, once in a lifetime events. And, now it's been twice in a recent lifetime event. And I think it'd be interesting to ask about how people reacted to Sandy, because in fact, I'm on the Upper East Side, and we did have a power blackout, and it did affect us. And I had, at the time, my elderly father was alive, and he was in our apartment, and I did have layers and layers of other concerns. And they're somewhat tangentially related to transportation and access to care and supplies and such, and somewhat related to going up and down, lots and lots of flights of stairs in a high-rise building. And I think that it's really important to look at it through the lens of transportation. And in fact, when we just take a little more of a bird's eye view, it relates to every other portion of climate change and healthcare and supply chain and overcrowding and all of those issues. So I think that an organic response and having different heads of committees speak to each other is a wonderful idea, to come together sort of with a united view, and then also to be able to take our own perspectives and break apart it and take actionable steps. I know in our area, I've been advocating for a long time to have local air quality measures taken, because I think our nearest air quality measure is on 14th Street, which is a different microclimate than we have. And certainly when we have demolition sites of construction in our neighborhood, we notice just astronomical amounts of mold in the air that affects people with respiratory distress. And although it seems not to be a factor in this particular meeting, but it must be noted that these effects are disproportionately felt by our citizens, workers, and students of color in this city. And so it becomes a racial justice issue as well. And so we can take small steps. We can start taking the actual data, doing the air quality monitoring, and taking a look at the sea levels. I thought the maps that you showed were incredibly effective about which areas just of Manhattan were more vulnerable than other areas, and how we became affected. Because the next time it rises, I have sort of a joke about how we're going to be like Venice, and First Avenue will make a beautiful kayaking lane. But that's not a joke I really want to happen. So the more that we can actually head this off by taking actual action and not just remedial action, not to say that we shouldn't take remedial action, we need that, but the more that we can head off problems with a reasonable, if not bold, vision of steps to be taken, and the faster that we can do that, I think the better off we will be, and the cheaper it will be for us in the short and long term. And just thank you so much for this whole evening.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, I really appreciate and concur with a lot of the comments that Wendy made. And I'd also like to kind of amplify that that a lot of these issues, I think, also affect economically people who are, more on the edge of that are struggling economically, that any of these issues tend to affect them more than people who have more resiliency financially. And so I think that they get impacted by these struggles much more severely than we do.
Right. I'm just going to tell you one thing. This was not Ida or Sandy, but we had the blackout, I think it was 2003, that lasted in my area, my street. Some streets were different, for a very long time. And it was August and boiling hot.
I remember that.
Not only, luckily I lived alone, so the idea that you couldn't flush your toilet wasn't such a big deal, but I couldn't take a shower. And the food situation, and it ran out of water. So I had to keep going down 17 flights of stairs to buy water. The food was getting rotten. It was disgusting. You couldn't even get a piece of pizza or something like that. We were running out of food. The food was rotten. It was on the street. All these stores were and, you know, restaurants weren't functioning. Things were bare. It was really, really scary. So not only didn't we have the electricity, but when you think of everything that we need for it, such as water,
No, I was actually working at Hunter at the time, and one thing I'll remember I had to, you know, long odyssey getting back to my home in New Jersey, but the quiet, you know, I definitely concur that the challenges, but I also remember the quiet that came with that day, because it's like, wow, I don't hear the air conditioners running and all the other kinds of things. But this has been a really great conversation. I want to mention the issue, you know, we focused on transportation, but right up next was this issue of well-being. I mean, we would have kind of gone into that. And I think, you know, to the point that it was raised about, you know, the more vulnerable and the, you know, the elderly and so forth. So, you know, even in a, you know, in a, what by most measures is a fairly wealthy community, there are going to be folks, you know, that are very much more vulnerable, either because of health conditions or age and what have you. And so this notion of well-being, I think, would have been a really challenging topic to go through as well. So it's, we didn't get to it, but I mean, if we had more time, or if we, you know, and again, just to maybe say a little sum up, I mean, we're still, you know, in development. There are certain glitches that I saw, the things that didn't, you know, move as smoothly. We have to work with the, you know, the causes and, you know, the 1 to 10 and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of work refinements, but, you know, I think, you know, this engagement has been really tremendously helpful.
It's really interesting what you're doing.
Great, thank you, really appreciate it, and thanks to Parisa for being the wizard master behind the scenes with the program. But she's, I'm too old to figure these things out. No, I'm joking, but she's definitely can do it very well.
Yes, it certainly was.
Thanks, everyone. We heard great comments. We heard great participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes.
And we'll send you materials and whatever, if you need us, if you'd like us to come back in any capacity, thanks. And thanks to
I am
Will
going
as
to
well.
ask a question. Do you have resources to people that would have specific things to talk about what they're doing? Like, for instance, what's rain gardens? What are the things they're hoping to do in subways so that when rainwater comes, that it will collect it? I know there are things around. I don't know I don't know much about it. And would you have resources to that?
We could, there are certainly people who know about that stuff generally and or specifically. I mean, if you talk like urban vegetation, you know, definitely folks who can speak to that. Rain gardens, I know people, you know, at Hunter who could speak to that issue, you know, generally, you know, whether or not it's as specific a level that you want, but I mean, certainly we could help you out.
Okay, thank you. You'll be hearing from us and call on us.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time today, and
Oh, thank
you
you
for
I mean,
coming. We really do.
I know it's a, you know, really, I mean, my goodness, thank you so much.
And thank you, Will and Saida, for always behind the scenes doing this.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah, they're our Parisa.
Right.
Very good.
Great.
Oh, one quick thing, the recording, is it okay? I think, Will, I emailed you or somebody. Is it possible for us to look at just to sort of,
absolutely,
you know,
just get on our CB8M and follow it. Look for this.
Oh, it's going to be posted up
yourself, probably right there.
Okay,
you know, and it's the whole thing is recorded. It's great. We go back to meetings and everything. And I'm going to ask for those from other committees to look at it to see what they think about it also.
Great. Very good.
Yeah, just go to the same page that you went to sign in for the meeting, and the video is already there.
Okay, wow. Very good. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.